Last week we started looking at the story of Cain and Abel. I thought it was a valuable thing for us to spend a little time doing, and so that's what we're going to kind of continue now. We'll try to catch us up quickly to what we had done last week. Okay, everyone. Okay, since I put you all on mute, asked you to mute yourselves, you didn't answer me so directly. So this is the awkwardness of looking and teaching to a screen of lovely people. All right, so here's the text. V'hadam yadat Chava ishto, and the man knew Chava, his wife. Vatahar batelet at Cain, and she conceived, and she gave birth to Cain. Vatomer kaniti ishat Adonai, and she said, I have acquired a man with God. We explained a lot about that last week, what that name meant. It might really be the wonder of childbirth that Chava, the mother of all life, has first time ever experienced. So she's very excited about that, that she has given birth to a human being, the first birth of a human being ever. Vatosef la'ledet achiv, and she continued to give birth to his brother, to Hevel. And Hevel became a shepherd, and Cain became a tiller of the soil. One of the things that's unusual here for us to take note of is what happens. Right? Usually, when we want to have a series of births that are described to us in the Torah, we will have the phrase "Vatar vateled, Vatar vateled, Vatar vateled." She conceived and she gave birth. Here, the phrase that is used is "Vatosef la'ledet," "Vatosef la'ledet," and she continued, and she gave to give birth. Does anybody want to offer what you might think to be a possible rendering and meaning of that choice?
Sure.
Okay, who's that?
That they're twins.
That they are twins, right? Vatosef la'ledet. We'll take a look exactly as it's presented to us in the Midrash. Rabbi said Cain and Hevel were twins, as it says, and she conceived and gave birth to Cain. At the very time she continued to give birth, and she continued to give birth to his brother. So there's one conception and two births. So they are twins, according to this reading of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. And that's actually very, that can impact on how we looked at this story, because there is clearly a rivalry that's going to take place here between Cain and Hevel. Interesting. There's both a partnership and a rivalry that takes place between them, twinness is it adds to that. Let's actually pause for a second. Does anybody have any thoughts about what you know about twins, or observed about twins in your own lives? Greg's here with twins.
But the story of Cain and Abel.
Oh, well, yes, that's our topic. Good.
I usually
Yosef, no.
I'm not interested in biblical twins. I'm interested in real flesh and blood twins in you in your own world. So normally, what did you want to say?
They have a special bond. Sometimes they have their own language.
Sometimes their own language. We're going to let Greg talk in a second. My rabbi in growing up in Richmond had twins. I have twins or do they have triplets? I'm trying to remember now. And my sister was a babysitter for them. These two little impish kids, locked her out of the house, teamed up in every way, and they talked in their own language, the two of them, and to conspire against my poor sister babysitter. Greg, now tell us, your kids don't speak yet.
I don't have many data points to add here.
Okay.
I'm looking forward to all of the above. Competition, speaking, whatever. Yes.
So I think what we know, I guess we can conjecture in our own minds, though, that whatever we know of sibling rivalries that do exist in homes and households, so that they can be more intensified. So either there is a special bond between twins, or there can be a rivalry between twins, and that's what we have to figure out here in our story, as it certainly becomes a rivalry. It's not clear exactly whether it's bi-directional or not, right? That's harder to tell. So let's go back to our text and see what the Torah wants to tell us. So the Torah mentions to us that Hevel was a shepherd and Cain was a tiller of the soil, and it doesn't really tell you much about how that came to be. Let's take a look for a second at the midrash here. We're talking about the names last week, but let's take a look at this Radak. And I'm not sure I'm going to be happy with the translation, but we'll do our best. So, Norma, can you see this? But you have to unmute yourself.
Okay.
Can you read that?
Brothers grew up, they divided their occupation in the
Forget the word in.
lives. One who became a shepherd to eat dairy products and shear the sheep for the wool of the sheep to make clothing. They did not eat meat, for God had only permitted Adam and his wife to eat the grass, the fruit of the trees, and bread after back-breaking labor, as we have explained. The generations until the deluge adapted themselves to this lifestyle. It was only in Genesis 9, verse 3, that God permitted killing animals for the purpose of eating their meat.
Right. So the shepherding was not for the sake of having lots of to eat the meat, but it was only for the other benefits of shepherding, which would bring you milk, cheese, the wool to warm yourself. And that's why they did that. But what's interesting in this Radak is that if you assist again how he phrases it in the Hebrew, kishagadlu nechlaku b'malachtam l'tzorach as when they grew older, they divided in their malacha for the sake of their survival. And I don't know. I mean, I'm reading this. I think that it was like a partner in a partnership. You'll do this and I'll do that, and between the two of us, we'll be providing for our needs. Right? That's the simple reading. So that it was a strategy that the two of them together, had developed. That's how I think we should understand this. So they cooperate to deal with the challenge of life. Okay. So that brings us to the day. Vayihi miketz yamim. Vayave Cain mifri adama minchal Adonai, and it was miketz yamim. So literally, it means something like at the end of days. Not to be confused with the Kate's Hayamim. Kate's Hayamim is actually the end of days prophecies about what's going to happen when the world is coming to its end. But Miketz Yamim is after the passage of time has passed. The calendar is ripping off pages, right? Time passes, and now we have the offerings the two of them bring. So let's take firstly the look at the midrash on the passage of time. What does it mean? Time passes, right? So when do you want to read this for us? At the end of days or something like that? Wendy, you're muted. You have to unmute yourself.
Sorry. It's okay. And at the end of days, it came to pass that Cain brought the fruit of the ground. After the passage of days may imply either the end of the year, the end of 2 years, after a certain number of days, or after 40 years. Our sages of blessed memory said that Cain and Abel were 40 years old when Cain brought of the fruit of the ground.
So this midrash lays out for you every possibility, right? A year has passed. 2 years maybe it passed, because that would be like, because like yom is 1, 2, so doubling of the whole cycle, right? Or 40 years, and the sages, they say, preferred 40 years. Anybody have thoughts on 40 years?
40 years in the desert.
40 years marks adulthood.
40 years marks adulthood.
40 years desert.
So I'm sorry. So David marks adulthood and actually, sort of like, full maturity of thought, right? That's that we associate that with, when you can now study the the esoteric teachings. Yes. Anybody else ever thought about 40?
40 years in the desert.
We got a lot of 40s. We love 40s all over the place. 40s, 40 days, 49, where we go. So 40 is a big number. And so they kind of grab onto the 40 here. We also have other 40s, right? Certainly with Yaakov and Esav, we got some 40s going on too. So, okay, but 40 years is an interesting extended period of time. I want to show you what the Rav Sadia says here. I did not translate Rav Sadia Gaon. He's really one of the earliest commentaries we can come across. He said the following: Magaram lizman shalab amar vayihimi ketzim. What caused this? This thing about length of days. So here he offers the following. Okay, let's go this way. הסיבה הראשונה, צריך היה להמתין זמן שיש בו כדי הצמחת פירות. In passive time, you need enough time for plant life to produce fruit. And so the story couldn't happen without the passage of time. You're not working with the 40 years, right? Time has to pass so that offerings can be brought from that which is produced. Okay. Then he goes on to say, Hashniyahi, so he's another second reading is it's a longer time. Himtinu ad shehitrabu vladot balei. So they waited till there were enough animals, interestingly, enough animals that had multiplied, so that if they would bring sacrifices, it wouldn't diminish the population of animals on the planet. Okay, that's the second reading. The third reading he offers, let me move this over, is Kadesh Yigdalu Cain and Abel, so that we want to get to the point where Cain and Abel have matured themselves. The Yagiu L'Meitav Bagrutam, and they should arrive at sort of the fullness and of their virility and strength. And adulthood, they should be fitting to be people who would bring offerings. And so there, maybe 13 years at least, right? For at least the youngest of them should have been at least 13 years old. And so that is another reading of it. So let's just stop there for a second and ask you about meaningful offerings. Meaningful. When is an offering meaningful? How old do you have to be for an offering to God to somehow be weighty enough and meaningful enough?
13.
So you say 13. Okay. Anybody else have other numbers, other ages?
Why should age matter if you have an offering to give to God? I mean, and it's from your heart. Why should age matter?
I agree with Wendy.
Mm-hmm.
But don't you have to be bar mitzvah?
Why?
So we like the bar mitzvah thing, but you want to. So Wendy, you want to even be younger than that?
Well,
even a kid. Even a kid, we love the Hasidic stories. Love the little kids, like the story about the little kid who blows the flute, or and his prayer matters more than anybody else's prayer, or the Aleph Beit version of that same story. We like those. Yeah. So I'll give you a different, reflection here. So we were, as you know, we needed to expand our cadre of people who would be daveners for us, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And thank God, we really were able to tap a lot of people who stepped up to lead lots of different parts of the davening. And so, and the youngest of our daveners was Benny Ram. Okay, Benny Ram, who's 17 years old, was the chazan for Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Hashanah morning and Yom Kippur morning. So that is that is not a norm. A norm would be on a regular year, we would not choose someone of his age. Why not?
Because we would feel he doesn't have empathy for the crowd.
Oh. Okay, empathy was. I wasn't looking for the word empathy, but close enough, right? You are there to represent all the heavy burdens of difficult life before your maker, and the kids don't chop that as much, sufficiently. So empathy is probably the right word, right? So you want somebody who's got the maturity of experience to be your Baal Tefillah. I imagine that for some people, when Chazan Yitzi's first year came into the shul, and he looked like he was very, very, very young. So that's also right. That could have been a challenge. We want somebody who's suffered more. Right, whatever it's going to be. So that I think kind of lies behind this. Like, for an offering to really be to be weighty, it means that you have the maturity of awareness of what life has been and how challenging it is to live.
Rabbi,
Go ahead.
could say the same about you when you first came, that there were people who thought,
I know.
Look how young he is.
For my first 15 years here, people called me, introduced me as our young new rabbi. And at some point, it's like, I'm 40 years old. 40 does it, right? So I don't know how many of you, there was an article in the Times about child soldiers, and I guess it was in Myanmar. And child soldiers, I mean, like these were 10-year-olds who were being used as somehow as deflection for at the front of armies that were led by adults, and eventually they ended up leading their own militias. They were 10 years old, and now they was talking about what's the impact on them all these years later. A lot of impact. It's pretty heavy impact,
Wow.
right? So you say to yourself, my God. How they shouldn't have had to known from all of that, right? So I think when we try to imagine their age when they offer these offerings, although Wendy's right, even you appreciate, we're kind of looking for something where it means something for them to make these offerings, and that's the Miketz Yamim that the Torah has, and that we need to keep in mind as we then read what happens in the story, right? So let's go back to it. By the way, when on your screens, I have a few of you in front of me, and I keep on moving you around so you don't cover text. I don't know if you see all of the other pictures of screens. Do you only see me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
See me. Okay. All right. I'm happy to see all of you, but I keep on moving you out of the way of the text. So Cain brought mipri ha'adama mincha laHashem, from the fruit of the ground, an offering to God. V'hevel hevi gam hu mibecharot sono mibechal behen. So Cain does what he does, and Hevel does what he does. He brings from the sheep and from their fats. And God, Vayisha Adonai al Hevel ve'el minchato, God paid heed. He turned towards Hevel and his, ve'el Cain ve'minchato losha, and not towards Cain and to his offering. And Cain's very upset. So this notion of making offerings, we talked very briefly about this, and just imagining what the age they were. We want to know how should a human being know to make an offering? Now I'm going to stop sharing the screen again. You can unmute yourselves for a few moments. How does a human being know to make an offering to God altogether?
I don't know.
Instinctively?
Instinctively. Hedda says instinctively. That's how you know to make an offering. Yes?
Well, I mean,
Debbie.
Adam probably told them about his experiences with God.
Okay, so David wants to imagine that this is a received instruction and tradition. Debbie, you were raising your hand. You have to unmute yourself. We're going to try to unmute you. Okay. One more time, Debbie, on the screen. The bottom left, if you're using a PC, the bottom left has a mute button. Mute and unmute, like a little microphone. And if you're using an iPad, it's the top right, I'm told.
You can also just hold the space bar temporarily. I think that works too.
Oh, let's try that. If you have a laptop, just try to push the space bar. See what happens. All right, I think we don't have Debbie. I'm sorry, Debbie. If you want to type to us, if you want to type it in the chat, you can try to type it to us. So far we have two approaches. Hedda says it's innate and intuitive. David Wassman says something about they learned something from Adam. What else? Any other possibilities? Other suggestions? Okay. Somebody, by the way, has a little background noise. If you mind, Willie, you want to maybe turn off your mic? Because it might be coming from you. I'm not sure.
No, it's not. There's no sound in here.
Okay.
Okay.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes, you are.
Ah, okay. So I was just going to say something similar about he got it from his parents, but maybe the parents had made sacrifices while they were bringing these boys up.
Maybe actually Adam had brought sacrifices too. Okay.
Because
Okay.
they couldn't have lived hungry for all that time till the boys were 40 years old.
Yes, but we've already pointed out that they couldn't eat meat. So whatever sacrifices or offerings they make to God are not going to be the type of offerings that a person. I skipped over the piece talking about whether they brought a peace offering or an ola, a burnt offering. But even if it's a peace offering, they would not have eaten from it because that was not permitted to them. They couldn't eat meat. So so where does all that come from? So that's what we have to try to unpack a little bit. Let's take a look at how some of these commentaries read it. First, the Gemara in Avodah Zarah. Greg, you want to read for us the Gemara in Avodah Zarah over here?
The sages taught on the day that Adam, the first man, was created, when the sun set upon him, he said, "Woe is me, as because I sinned, the world is becoming dark around me, and the world will return to the primordial state of chaos and disorder."
He got it right.
So
He was afraid of darkness,
right?
right? He was afraid of darkness. He'd never seen darkness. Is it all over? Especially because, according to the sages, he sinned the very first day. Now I totally messed everything up. Go on.
And this is the death that was sentenced upon me from heaven. He spent all night fasting and crying, and Eve was crying opposite him. Once dawn broke, he said, "Evidently the sun sets and night arrives, and this is the order of the world." He arose and sacrificed a bull whose horns preceded its hoofs in the order that they were created, as is stated, and it shall please the Lord better than a bullock that has horns and hoofs.
So the sages have a tradition that you read this verse in Tehillim. By Titab Hashem Mishor Par. There's some reading also that says a shor par is a reference to a new offspring bullock, and that Adam was the first person to bring a sacrifice. And what motivates Adam to bring a sacrifice? He is appreciative to be alive, right? And he wants to give something to God to show his appreciation. That's okay. Now, I would not have thought of that necessarily, right? But that's what he thought. He should bring an animal sacrifice to show that appreciation. Rav Sadia Gaon. I've given you. I have a text here in the Hebrew and not in the.
It's odd that he would kill an animal to
That's
do
right.
such.
That's
opposed to, like, pick an apple. I don't know.
Pick an apple. That's bad. That was yesterday.
Yeah, but you know what I mean.
Right. You're right.
You're
Yes.
God. You wake up in the morning. God is great, and you kill.
Right. Why would you think? Why would a person think that sacrificing an animal is the way to show your appreciation to God? That's the hard part here, right? To a certain degree, Cain's choice is much better. You bring a plate of vegetables and fruit before God. So Rabbi Sadia going to the following. And this is a discussion he has here about whether there actually were commandments given, and he says. Who karban behema, b'kiddush b'chorot mizmar hevel. Right. So this whole notion of bringing a sacrifice of an animal and setting aside the firstborns, as you find of first things, as you find with hevel. Shalosh mitzvot ele iyafshar shekain vehevel asuo tamidatam. Sadia Gaon, right? Rav Sadia Gaon, back 9th century, I believe. He says. These things, it is impossible that Cain and Hevel brought a sacrifice or offering to God midatam from their own thinking. El al pi mitzvot mitzaveh was only based on the commandment of a commander, v'chukat mechokek, and the rules of the one a lawgiver. Ki davar zeh hakarbonot ein haseichel melchayavo u'muskal rishon. Quoting basically Richard Spitz. Right, logic would not, in the first pass of logic, would not have told you go ahead and kill an animal and bring it to God. Adarabba, the opposite is true. Right? You need a lot of convincing to tell you this is what is the right thing to do, to go ahead and kill an animal to bring it to God, especially if God said your job is right. You're supposed to master over the animals, but you can't kill them in other ways. Ramban, on the other hand, Ramban here goes into a very different read, and he says, Rick, you want to read this Ramban for me? Sorry, I make you do this.
Okay. These people understood a great secret of the offerings and the grain offerings, and so did Noach. And our sages stated that Adam also offered a bullock, and this will silence those who panic regarding the meaning of offerings.
And his reference is actually to Rambam. The Rambam has a whole discussion where he contends, the Rambam contends that sacrifices were a concession to idolaters, because idolaters brought sacrifices, and that's what people grew accustomed to. And so the Jews, the Israelites leaving Egypt, needed needed somehow to transfer what they were familiar with into some way to serve God. So God said, all right, bring me sacrifices. That's how the Rambam basically understands, philosophically how he understands it. And the Ramban is pulling his hair out from this Rambam. Ramban, let me clarify. Rambam Maimonides, Ramban Nachmanides. Okay, so Maimonides has a philosophical position about sacrifices, which Nachmanides finds horrible and just wrong. It's clear that God wants them, likes them, thinks it's good, and people are drawn to do it naturally, and is not to be understood as some type of concession to idolaters. That is what Nachmanides says, and he feels that these texts themselves, this storyline, disproves the Rambam, because Cain and Abel, were they worshiping idols? No, you can all shake your heads. No, they weren't worshiping idols. They were worshiping the Lord, and sacrificing was done, and God, God was good with it. Now, I'm going to make a case for Rick Spitz for a moment and say, hey, the reason why God rejected Cain's offering was because God says, what the heck? Why are you killing animals? No, that's not true, because God accepted the animal offering and rejected the plant offering, and that's why it seems that God likes carnivorous behavior. Sorry, Rick. Although, again, the only one who's going to consume this, the only one to consume the sacrifice is God. How does God consume a sacrifice?
I read somewhere as a footnote to this, and I'll have to get back to you as to where I read it, because it was a while ago. But I read somewhere that this whole story also has to do with world history of aggression by farmers against shepherds that goes back, to ancient days, to these days that we are speaking of right now.
Yes.
And that the farmers are the aggressors of the planet and take over the world and create empires so they can expand and grow and take the land and so on. Whereas the shepherds are the nice people, leave me alone. I'm going to have my goats in the field and so on and so on. And that this is a mythological.
Isn't that Yuval Harari?
On that.
Is that his name? Yuval Harari? Is that his name?
No, it's not Harari.
Okay.
Although Harari might have done that. It's possible it's Harari, but I'm not referring directly to Harari.
It's Rogers and Hammerstein. The farmers and the cowmen can't be friends, from Oklahoma.
Wow. We can also now reference East of Eden, which is certainly going to be part of our story. It's built on this story too. Okay, so we got some interesting approaches to this. I want you to, Ramban says what he said. I mentioned that, and let's just see one more text of note here, which is, this is taken from the Enuma Elish tablet. Now, Enuma Elish was the ancient mythology about of the creation story. It's a very lengthy depiction of what's happening in the world of the gods and the takeover attempts and the way you deal with the rebellious Kingu, which is the party here. But I want you to read these lines from his Kingu's blood. He, which would be like from earth, he created mankind from Kingu's blood. The one he is put down, the aggressor. They take his blood and create human beings. Again, we're looking at a pagan story, on whom he imposed the service of the gods and set the gods free. After the wise, he had created mankind and imposed the service of gods upon them, etc., etc. So people in this version were created, human beings were created to feed and serve the gods. That's why they exist. Okay? Our philosophy is seemingly different, although it's not laid out for us, directly in the Torah. And philosophically, what are the ways in which we understand why does God create human beings? What are you familiar with some of the suggestions philosophically in Jewish thinking why God creates the human?
Serve God.
To serve God.
He wants our obedience.
He wants our obedience. Willie, you're on mute. Go ahead, Willa. Oh, you're back on mute. Go ahead.
He was bored
God was
and
bored.
he needed entertainment.
God and entertainment. So that would be right. These are somewhat cynical, sinister views of God. Okay.
And
Maybe
also,
we need to subdue our animal instincts.
But why did God need to create anything, right? So it goes back to the core question about why does Bereshit happen? Why does God create the world? What is it all for?
he was filling a void.
Filling a void. Yes, Stephen, what are you saying?
9% of viruses and bacteria initially. Once dry, it forms a bacteria.
Hold on, folks.
Bacteria for
Stephen, were you about to say something?
Nope, just
Okay.
listening. Thank you.
Okay. So seemingly, certainly in the Hasidic approach or the Kabbalistic approach, God creates human beings because God wants to give and God wants to share, and the act of creation is an act of giving, and then the rabbinic teaching about the Torah that God had a way of being that was so powerful that He said, I want entities to live and carry this out, and so He creates humans so they can live out the Torah. Or God is it's about chesed, it's about God's kindnesses. So I just want you to understand that Kabbalistic teaching is in direct opposition to this pagan teaching. The human beings are created not because the gods want to take, but human beings are created because gods want to live. And so God didn't create human beings so that we would sacrifice to God, even if sacrificing is something that is considered to be appropriate. And we go back to Hedda's teaching, which is basically people give offerings to God to show somehow it's innate in them that they want to show appreciation, right? Hedda, were you saying that? Hedda, was that not what you were saying?
Well, yeah, that I'm not sure if it's exactly that, because then I'm not sure. Yeah, that we have a feeling, we don't know, so maybe they just started. They knew that God existed.
Yes.
How can I relate to God? How can I talk to Him? So maybe.
So it was
or were
a
there
desire.
other people outside that they already knew about sacrifices?
So there was something inside of them that wanted to do this.
Mind and decided to flood the earth. Wasn't so thrilled with his creation, with his.
Well, by the time you get to the end of Bereshit, God's had enough, right? That's true. By the time God's had enough because we have totally fouled things up.
Done with it.
Okay, so let's move a little forward. Okay, so we'll skip these for now. There's this teaching about Pesach night, which is very strange, but okay. Let's talk about the difference between the offerings. That's really what things are critical, because they both bring offerings, and God, we're told, Vayisha Hashem el Hevel ve'el minchato, and God. Again, hard to translate what Vayisha means. It's but he turned towards it. The simple understanding is that the fire from heaven, which is the way in which you know that God is accepting, came down and somehow and swallowed up the mincha, the offering, but it paid no heed to Cain's offering at all. So yeah, And we should clarify, the Torah is very clear about what God paid no heed to. What do we see very clearly in the verse? God turned towards and paid heed towards.
Where are you? What?
Here. It's not merely that God liked one offering and rejected the other offering. What does the Torah make clear?
Well,
choices.
Yeah, he's rejecting the person. Too.
God rejects the person. Okay? God turns towards Hevel and his offering and turns away from or ignores Cain and his offering.
Well, was it because Cain did not
don't answer the question. Wait. Don't answer the question about why right now. But I just want to make it very clear. The Torah is stating that it's not merely a rejection of the offering; it's a rejection of the person. It doesn't mean permanently, but whatever Cain is going to take personally, he is right for taking personally, because this was a personal statement on God's part. I'm not liking what you're doing here, and not merely I didn't like what the plate of food that you gave me.
Rabbi,
how do we know that?
That story that story is continued throughout Bereshit, where the father of different families, we can go through that, desires one son over another son.
Well, let's not equate God with fatherhood right now. But you're right. Maybe you're right. Right. The acceptance of one and rejection of the other is God sets. Maybe different. God sets a pattern for what the avot do later on.
Yes.
Okay.
Rabbi.
Go ahead. Yes, Richard.
Debbie.
Oh,
Debbie.
okay. Is it possible the reason God didn't want to accept that and didn't want the offering person, the one who offered it to him, because God was being a vegetarian at the time? And
No, but again,
people were also vegetarian. And he said, "What? You think I'm going to have that? I'm not going to have that."
But Debbie, it's reversed, right? Because God accepts the animal and rejects the vegetarian offering.
Oh, okay. Well,
I'll tell you this: if I go to a nice restaurant, I want to, I'm sorry, right? If I'm at a nice restaurant, I'm not buying a vegetarian meal.
I'm not taking you out for dinner.
No. Let me clarify. If I'm at a vegetarian restaurant, I'd love a vegetarian meal. Okay, but if I'm at a Fleishik restaurant, I'm not buying the vegetarian. I'm here for a Fleishik meal. Okay, so so why did God reject Cain and Cain's offering while accepting Hevel and Hevel's offering? What is there a hint in the text? Jerry, I want to hear what you think, and we'll look back at the text.
Isn't there a story, though, that when God decides to create humans, the angels have a dispute?
Yeah,
and some say, don't. After all, you have us. Why create man?
Yes.
And the thought correct and follows that is that God is going to throw certain characteristics like truth and loyalty, and certain righteous things out, and to see whether man develops these. And therefore, when it comes to these sacrifices, he checks whether the one who's giving the offering is in fact fulfilling his thought that they will do the righteous things.
Oh, okay, good. That's fair. Good. I like that, right? And maybe did you listen to my 3-minute daily dose of Torah last week?
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Okay, so you got part of that there. Good. Wonderful. A little plug for everybody. So what was wrong with what Cain did versus what Hevel did? Can we tell from the text at all? So let's just look at the language again in the text.
Yes, the fruit of when he gave what was from the ground, that's not very good stuff. That's the stuff that's surplus or not, or maybe damaged.
Good.
Whereas Abel gave the best of his flocks.
So Norma is focusing on the Hebrew text that Cain brought mi pri hadama from the fruit, whereas when it says Cain mi bechorot sono from the first means, which in this case means like the best of his flock. and not simply from the flock. So to say from the fruit implies already that you went through and you have a basket full of apples and you took the gnarled ones and you gave them to God. You say, what the heck? What's the difference? He doesn't really eat them anyway. Right? We all know he doesn't really eat them. So I'll give him the gnarled ones. And so that's basically how this is read. Okay.
Well, you didn't
Well,
necessarily.
he may not have done that on
But
purpose.
Didn't
It may not have been intentional.
One at a time.
It may not, it may not have been intentional. It may be that he just put his hand in the basket and whatever he took out, that's what he brought.
Fair, right? But it certainly means though it was not thoughtful.
It was
right?
not thoughtful.
That makes it thoughtless. Now, thoughtless is not as bad as intentionally bad, but it's not thoughtful. Rick,
Right.
Rick, what are you going to say?
Exactly that. There was no intention around it.
Okay, so let's take a look at this text over here. Bobby, you want to read for us the Breshit Rabbah? But you're on mute.
No, not anymore.
Okay.
Okay, and Cain brought from the fruit of the land an offering, a mincha to Hashem from the leftovers, similar to the evil tenant that eats the first fruits and gives to the owner of the field that stunted ones. And Hevel brought also he from the firstborn of his sheep and their fat.
So right, that's by the way, you can go to the grocery store and every fruit in the bin of a nice grocery store is looks looks lovely, right? But if you go to the farmer's market, the farmer's market say, hey, we is what we is here, folks, right? And this is what carrots actually look like. Some of them are nice and shapely, and some of them are twisted. And that's what's the problem. Okay, so that's a part of us which saying like come on, really. But take a look, Bobby. Read the next one, also the Midrash Tanchuma.
Okay, what did he bring as his offerings? He brought only the leftovers of his meal. However, the rabbis maintain that Cain brought flaxseed, while Hevel brought firstlings of his flock and of the fat thereof.
Pause for a second. So mipri hadama, they're saying is flax seed. Now I happen to put flax seed into sometimes in my yogurt, which is lovely, right? But flax seed is would you consider that a dish? No. Right? And flax in and of itself is not even edible. So I'm guessing, is flaxseed that we have they sell in the store actually from the same flax plant, which is not even a food? Or is it like somebody shares the name? Maybe I got that wrong. Clearly what they're talking about is something which isn't edible. Zera pishtan. So he brings God not even food. Now look what it goes on to say. It's a very interesting midrash. That is why it is ordained.
That is why it is ordained that wool and flax must not be mixed. As it says, thou shalt not nowhere mingled stuff, wool and linen together.
What do we call that in Hebrew? Shatnez. The rule of shatnez, which Torah has no explanation why you can't wear wool and linen mixed together. This midrash says it goes back to the ancient story of Cain and Hevel.
That's right.
Wow. The source
Linen,
of law, go ahead.
Linen comes from flax.
Yes. Go on.
Prohibiting the wearing of wool and linen together. The Holy One, blessed be he, declared it is not fitting that a sinner's offering and the sacrifice of a virtuous man should be coupled. Hence, it is forbidden to combine them in a garment.
Wow. That's so interesting, right? That it suggests that these were diametrically opposed. One is something which is virtuous and fine, and the other one is not. And so don't mix them together. I don't want to see you wearing in your clothes or anywhere else. That's the rule of shatnez. So we're gonna stop here, everybody. Next week we're going to talk about then the conversation that God had with Cain. and then Cain's reaction to that, and then obviously it's a bigger reaction that he has. But that's what we'll try to pick up next week. We'll spend some more time on this. I thought it was only be like 2 weeks. I'm imagining this is going to be a few weeks for us to tackle this. Okay, everybody? Okay. Thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Take care.
Everybody.
Bye-bye.